Is it worth it? Let me work it.
Wait, can we reverse this audio and see if it sounds right? It's your service when you I know service
Tatas and Tea. I'm Amanda,
And I'm Will.
and welcome to Tatas and Tea. So this week, Alexa is under the weather. So we have a special guest, my friend Will, who I met to no one's surprise on a cruise.
So this was in March of 2022, and we were going on a cruise. Me and my husband were living up in Jersey at the time, and we went on it with a couple friends, and we went to the LGBT meetup. And who do we see but a lovely lesbian named Amanda with red lipstick and a red shirt and blue jeans and white shoes.
I love that you remember the exact outfit. It's my
Yeah, I mean,
signature.
that changed my life forever for good.
Yeah, I remember when I first met you guys on the cruise because I was at the solo meetup, which was at the whiskey bar. And then the LGBTQ meetup was right after. And I looked behind me and I saw the four of you sitting on a chair. And I was like, those look like gay guys. So I was just like, hey, are you guys here for the meetup? And you were like, yeah, isn't that obvious? And I was like, I mean, you looked a little gay. So we
Yeah.
bonded over being gay initially.
Yeah, we did, of course. And honestly, if you ever go on a cruise, highly recommend, not that this is supposed to be a cruising episode, I highly recommend going to the LGBT meetup at least the first couple nights because usually it's popping and then you meet people that you're hanging out with the rest of the cruise.
We're here for the gays, the girls and
Exactly.
the gays.
Although remember the last cruise you went up and there was two, not to stereotype, but they were screaming lesbian couple and they came to the bar that was the meetup and you were like, "Oh, are you guys here for the meetup?" And they said, "No." And they walked away.
They were definitely lesbians and they were
Uh-huh.
definitely there for the meetup, but they didn't want to hang out with us. And that's
Mhm.
fine. But that's how you do it. You just go up to someone you think is gay and say, because you don't want to ask someone if they're gay. Hey, are
Right.
you gay?
Yeah.
So
Instead you'd be like, "Are you a top or bottom?" Just kidding. I just feel like it's easy to meet other gay people because you already have like something in common which like connects you in such a big deep way. Like it sounds silly, but like often when we are looking for friends or new friends in an area, like we do kind of gravitate towards gay people or lesbian people or somebody in the community, or at least somebody very friendly or allies with the community, because there's already this like shared understanding of experiences we've all gone through, and we already kind of all feel like outsiders in some kind of way. And so I've always found it a lot easier to immediately connect with gay people I don't know than even with like people like straight people or other, demographics of people who don't fit in with the community. So,
and even though like we have so much in common, it's still so crazy because there's so many differences between gay men and lesbians and people who are bi. Just everyone in the queer community has such different experiences, different lingo too. There's
mhm.
just so much that's the same but also different. Like,
Yeah, we have top, bottom, verse. We have side. Do you know what side is?
I don't know what that is.
So those are people who like enjoy doing basically anything but penetrative sex.
Okay.
And so like oral and anything else. Those are primarily the positions that people take. And then there's verse bottom, verse top, which verse top is usually just like a bottom. But it just depends. And then there's terminology like as far as like that categorizes the type of lesbian or gay you are. So like with gay people, there's twinks, of course, which everyone knows what a twink is. I'm assuming you know what a twink is, right?
Name a more iconic duo
Doer
than a
than a
twink
twink.
and a redhead.
So a twink is like it's like a skinny, very skinny gay boy. Like usually they're kind of flamboyant, but that it doesn't necessarily describe their personality. It more so describes their body type. If you get a little bit more muscle mass, then you're a twunk. And if you get even more muscle mass, then you're a hunk. And then
Hmm.
if you are kind of like a bear is like somebody who's kind of like larger. You could be like overweight and hairy, or you could just be like more like larger, kind of beefy and hairy. Cub is more like a smaller bear. An otter is more like a skinny, really hairy, kind of squirrely guy. Anyways, so I think those are most of the general categories you use. I mean, there's a lot of other terms, but I can't really think of them right now. But And then with lesbians, there's like lipstick femmes, like butch queens, or maybe not butch queens, but like
Well, there's like different, yeah, there's definitely different. There's femme lesbians, which I think is the same really as like a lipstick lesbian.
okay,
And then you have a chapstick lesbian, which isn't really butch, but they're not femme. They're kind of
like sporty or
like a sporty spice type
okay,
of, chapstick.
yeah,
Like,
like they played volleyball or softball.
and then you have your butch lesbians, and
Okay.
then you have Futch, which is
Butch, I've never heard that
Futch,
before.
which is like femme and butch, like you
Okay,
can like do both.
kind of like
Or
androgynous in that way. I mean, but not with gender expression, more like with orientation.
yeah, kind of like if I were to like, or like more like a switch where like they'll wear dresses and do their makeup, but then they'll also wear like backwards caps and like,
Yeah.
so they just do both depending on the day.
Okay.
And then you have, I just learned this one. There's so many. A ninja lesbian, which is me, aka someone who passes as straight. Like you wouldn't know they're a lesbian when you meet them. So like
Okay.
they're a ninja because
All
they're
right.
like,
Oh, sneaky. Yeah.
yeah.
Like there are in gay guys you call that like, well, you call it on the DL. That's more somebody who like isn't out yet, but like
Hmm.
is kind of like out and about, if you know what I mean.
Guys who are on the DL, it's very interesting to me because clearly they're willing to explore that side of them, but something is preventing them from coming out and living their authentic lives. And I think it goes to, we've talked about on the podcast, internalized homophobia. And I wonder if it's also just this like idea of like toxic masculinity, like maybe they're afraid of femininity, and that's typically how people see the gay community, even though that's not necessarily what it is.
So ultimately, I feel like, part of them hates femininity in men because usually gay men have some sort of expression of femininity or are more comfortable expressing that in themselves, whether it's their emotions, whether it's how they're acting or how they're dressing, or even just their gay voice, which we can talk about as well, like almost being like able to pass in society. Like the gay voice kind of gives most of us away. And it's an interesting phenomenon that spans different cultures and different languages.
Which is why you had to practice your straight voice growing
Yeah.
up.
Do you want to hear it?
Yeah. Oh, what's your favorite sports team?
Probably the Eagles.
That is not it.
I didn't say I was good at it. I think so when I was younger I would just be like, yeah, I like basically didn't have emotion in my face or in my soul. And I would be like, yeah, for sure. I was watching a video where like apparently straight men like end their sentences differently. Like obviously how I just did like differently. Like we almost end in like
Hmm.
we go up in accent. Whereas straight men are very like, yeah, my favorite team is the Eagles. Yeah, I like to go play football. Whereas like I
Interesting.
like to go play football. See how it's like a little different? Yeah, ultimately it seems like straight men are more comfortable with lesbians just because they almost are more a little bit more masculine or express more masculinity, and that's more like them, and I feel like men are obsessed with themselves. And so anything that's like closer to what they like themselves, they're like into.
But I think also with lesbians, because I saw this video on TikTok of someone at Thanksgiving where they were talking about how homosexuality was wrong. And someone basically called out one of the men and was like, well, I know you like to watch lesbian porn and you're okay with that. And he was
Mhm.
like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I think that because a lot of times when it comes to that, it's feminine, it's very feminine.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously they're into that, but I think it's also like I support women in the sex industry, but I think for a lot of straight men, it's like demoralizing almost is how they see it, like demeaning. And I feel they just don't respect women. They don't respect gay men. And I think it's like this femininity in general that they don't respect. Like maybe they have more respect for the more mask. That's another term I should have
Yeah.
used, but mask lesbians
Okay.
versus like femme lesbians, where they're just sexualized for them.
True. Yeah, and they definitely like to fetishize them for sure. Even in like the Bible times, any like for example, there were in Greece and stuff, there was men who would engage with sex with other men. They anybody who was taking on the feminine role was considered basically less than. But so if you were bottoming essentially, you were essentially like it was a very negative view of you. But whereas the if you were gay, like doing gay sex with as the top, it was acceptable and nobody considered you gay or like less than, and it was fine because you were the one who was
That's definitely, I feel like, carried over to
for
how we are
sure.
in society. Even the differences between how people perceive gay men and lesbian women.
I found it interesting that apparently there's a study that shows, or there's studies that show generally that lesbians are perceived as more acceptable by society than gay men. Approximately 25% of LGBT adults believe there is a lot of social acceptance for lesbians compared to 15% of gay men. Also, like, it might tie into the fact of like some people are tolerant of lifestyles that they don't agree with as long as it's not like so obvious to them, right? Like if you're like
Mhm.
flying under the radar, like, oh, this is my roommate or whatever, they don't care, or some people don't care. But like if you're like out, like just living your life, expressing yourself, and it's in their face and they can't ignore it, like they don't like it. And I feel like maybe it's a bit easier for lesbians to pass in public. At least, obviously, it depends on the type of lesbian. And there's also so much like culturally or like pop culture, like of stereotypical gay men. And so like I feel like a lot of people can easily pick up like gay mannerisms, even people who are not gay. Um, I do feel like us gays are a bit better at picking that up in general. Like I feel like we have a little bit better gaydar, but I don't know. I feel like maybe there is a difference between lesbians and how like maybe they are able to go out into the world and not immediately be clocked basically for being, like, oh, they just dress in flannels and jeans. Like, so does my wife. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
is
Like,
it hipster? Whenever I'm in Brooklyn, I'm like, hipster or lesbian? I never
mm-hmm,
know.
mm-hmm,
Sometimes when I'm on a cruise, I'm like, mom or lesbian?
yeah,
You
it's
never
true.
know. I think it's a lot harder, I agree, unless it's like someone who's super mask to point out lesbians. Like I struggle real hard.
Mm,
I always hit on the straight girls.
I've seen it firsthand. That's another thing is, which I actually am like at the gay clubs. There's plenty of straight girls there, which I'm not opposed to at all. Like, cause I understand it. Like these girls they come to a gay club and they're like, "Oh my god, I can have fun and I don't have to worry about getting preyed on basically." Cuz I feel like at straight clubs it can be such like you know what I mean, kind of like I go into a gay club and I feel eyes on me and I'm only imagining like, men are so much grosser, like especially straight men. And so I can only imagine like the looks and the like flirting, unsolicited, sometimes unsolicited touching, you know what I mean? Like I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that breeds a very uncomfortable, and I think women are conditioned to just accept that and as like part of life. So I feel like it's a very safe space for women in general compared to some straight clubs, especially like dance clubs. But it certainly does make it a bit busier, and then it starts to be okay. Are these queer spaces anymore, or are they just for anyone? Which not I'm definitely not in support of gatekeeping anything like that. But
No, I agree. And gay bars are supposed to be super welcoming to everyone, but I feel like a lot of the spaces I go to are starting to be overrun by
yeah,
straight people and not just straight women. I was at a bar a couple months ago and I hadn't been in a while, and I was talking to one of the managers, and he was telling, and it's a queer bar, and he was telling me that the crowd is different and how it's mostly straight people that go there, and they've basically chased all of the gay people away, or the queer people away, because it's not a safe space for them anymore as queer people, because it's being overrun by straight people, and then they're like really rude to
yeah,
queer people. Because the thing I love about a queer space is you see things in queer spaces that you wouldn't see in a straight space, because it's not socially acceptable. Like you'll see like same-sex couples, but like you'll also see people wearing like leather and people wearing face masks or dressed up. Like you'll see furries at the bar, and it's totally cool and acceptable in a queer space, but then you have straight people coming in and like making fun of those people and
Yeah.
pushing those people out. And that's where I get I want it to be a welcoming space,
Yeah.
especially for women, right? Because it's
Mhm.
hard as a woman. But I have also been sexually assaulted at a gay bar by a man, a straight
Yeah.
man. So we're not safe anywhere. Women,
No,
you're
it's
just
true.
not safe. But
It's true.
it's very conflicting because I'm like, these are queer spaces for a
Yeah.
reason. Everywhere is a straight space.
Mhm.
So I think there's a fine line. Like if you're going to be a straight person entering a queer space, I think people need to be
Respectful.
mhm, more mindful, more demure.
Props to us, mama, that like we create spaces that are fun, so fun that everyone feels like they want to come. Like I do think gay people are like the life of the party pretty much. But yes, you're right. Then at some point it does become, or it can become, if you're getting kind of made fun of for expressing yourself how you express yourself in a queer space by straight people, that's kind of like triggering to a lot of us because our whole lives we were made fun of for our gayness for by straight people or people in the closet themselves.
And there's already so few queer spaces in
Mhm.
general. It is really hard when straight people occupy gay bars too, for me on a personal level, because I've mentioned this before, but I do have a tendency to hit on straight women at the bars and even on dating apps. I feel like there's no good, and I don't know if it's the same for gay men, but I feel like there's no good dating apps for lesbians because you have apps that are designed for lesbians. Like you have Her, for example. But a lot of the people on Her are looking for, they're like straight couples looking for,
Mm.
or, a man and a woman looking for a third.
Do lesbians have like just a hookup app, or do lesbians even just hook up? Like, is that like obviously like maybe if they meet out at the bar or something, but like, is that something they go online to like find and do?
Like there are people who are looking for just casual or just hookups, but most lesbians, I feel like, there's this stereotypical saying of what do you bring on the second date if you're a lesbian? A U-Haul.
Mm-hmm.
Because your first lesbian date is going to be at least 8 hours long,
That's
like
crazy.
typically.
I feel like on the flip side, gay men are like very non-committal, kind of scared of commitment. They love to keep everything very casual. Some people will just send naked pics right without even saying anything. Other times they'll say, "Hey, what's up? What you doing?" Gay men are very wired differently, I think, feel like than women, or men are wired differently than women in general, which also plays in the fact of like, I feel like I've talked to a lot of women, both straight women and lesbians and bisexual women. And the general theme I get is that like women are not into naked pics or sex, like in
Mm-mm.
general, even of women. I think they probably find of women more sexually appealing, but like in general, like they don't like that. Whereas men, both straight and gay, they like get off on that.
I agree with that. Like, photos don't do anything for me. Like, even when I dated men, like, I got so many unsolicited dick pics. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why are you sending this to me? Like, my friend and I in law school, we used to, whenever we get unsolicited dick pics, we would turn them into art. So, like, you know how you can, like, draw on your photos on your iPhone?
Mm-hmm.
So we would draw, like one time we made one a butterfly, and the other time it was like a guy who had a full selfie, so we turned him into a clown. We were like, well, what else are we gonna do with these? Like, I feel like men think that we're gonna do things with those photos,
Well, the
but
reality is, it goes back to men being obsessed with themselves, but like they like are like when you get a dick pic, they think it's like, oh, she's gonna think this is so hot.
mhm,
Like they don't. They're like, oh,
it's the biggest turnoff. Truly,
mm-hmm.
nothing made me dislike a man more than when I got a dick pic.
Yeah,
No, women definitely tend to go for more emotional connections.
yeah,
And I think that's why a lot of women, especially, identify as demisexual.
yeah,
So for me, I'm demisexual. So if
mm-hmm.
I don't have an emotional connection to someone, you could be the hottest person in the world. Doesn't matter to
Yeah,
me. If I'm not into your personality, you're ugly to me.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, I feel that. I also like. for me, it would be like if you're really hot. So I'm definitely not demisexual, but if you're really hot, but you're like you have a really ugly personality, like I could overlook some like a little, you're not the best personality, but if you have like a really ugly personality or you're just a mean person, like you're not hot anymore. You know what I mean?
It's just crazy how, like we said before, gay men and lesbians have so much in common, but they're so
Hmm.
different too in their terminology and the hookup culture. And maybe that goes to why there's this idea that gay men and lesbians are frenemies in a way. Are they friends? Are they
Hmm.
enemies?
Yeah, I think for a long time I never really understood it because like I never saw this kind of like, and I still don't really understand it, but I never really firsthand like saw like this kind of like, combating forces of gay men and lesbians. But I have seen some things over like now that I'm like much more involved in the gay community and going out to the gay clubs. And sometimes when things get brought up, there is sort of this like ugh lesbians kind of like vibe. I feel like in the past it was more like overt, like gay men don't like lesbians, lesbians don't like gay men. But I feel like that has gotten a lot better, especially with like the inclusion of trans identities and like generally us all being supportive of each other. Social media, I think, has really like done well. Obviously, there's drawbacks of social media, but I think it has done a lot to like give people community and open people's eyes to different perspectives. Because if I didn't have social media and I only had gay friends and there was this running thing about, oh, lesbians are this, that, and the other, of course I'm gonna think that as well. But because I think we're all, have a wider understanding of everyone at large, and you like, I don't know, those kind of stereotypes don't necessarily persist as easily, um, or that those kind of prejudices. And so to me, I never really understood like, okay, they're just lesbians. They're like part of our community. Like I don't know.
That's
And
kind of how I feel too.
yeah,
Like, where does that even come from, this like divide?
yeah. I think it's probably like ultimately the patriarchy. You know what I mean? Like ultimately, gay men still were benefiting from the patriarchy, and women weren't, and gay men probably were like overlooking, like, you know what I mean, like they were only focused on what was affecting them, and obviously like gay men and gay women had very different experiences, especially like with the AIDS epidemic and everything like that. And so I think all of that kind of caused this divide, and then I think over time it's kind of come back together. So um at least that's what we want, is world peace.
There's also a divide too for a lot of people, like who, for the bisexuals, there's
Yeah,
a
that's
divide.
true. And they like erase bi and they're like, oh, he's bi, but he'll come out one day as gay. Which like there
Mm-hmm.
are really bisexual people. Like
Yep.
believe it or not, like people are attracted to both men and women. I personally think most people fall somewhere on a spectrum. Now, is that 97% gay, 3% straight? Like, yeah, that's probably me. But like, would I ever pursue a woman sexually ever in my life again? 99.9% sure, no. Um, but I think most people fall within a spectrum, maybe towards one end or another. But some people really are close to the middle.
Yeah. Some people, I mean, I don't find myself falling close to the middle these days. I find
Hmm.
myself more in the 90s.
Yeah.
I always say I'm like 90% women, 10% everyone
Yeah.
else. But there, I tend to, when I look to date people, I tend to look for women, but I would never close myself off to
Right.
someone just because they're not a woman. But I think that bi erasure is so real for people because it's like straight people, like you said, it's like, oh, well, they're bi, but they're
Hmm.
are they really? Or even in I don't know if, this is as prevalent in the gay community, but in the lesbian community, I have a couple friends even who have said, well, I wouldn't date a bi girl.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, why? And it's always like, well, what if she leaves me for a man?
What if she leaves you for a woman?
My ex left me for a woman. Like,
Right.
they could leave you for anyone. And if they do leave you for a man, it's not because that person's a man,
Yeah. It's because they
Like,
weren't happy with you and they left.
yeah, or they weren't happy with themselves and they
Yeah.
left, or, who knows? I mean, I just think that I actually saw a TikTok recently that someone posted about how, like, it was a lesbian saying something about dating a bi woman and how like she broke her heart and then ended up with a man anyway. And I'm just like, what is, and all the comments were like, yeah, I would never do this again and blah, blah,
Mm,
blah. And it's like, why is that? Why is that the narrative? Because like someone's bi and dates
yeah,
men. Like, you wouldn't have that same narrative if they ended up dating a woman after they dated
yeah.
you.
I also think it's unfair to like bi people because like people who are bisexual, they're not gay enough for gay people, they're not straight enough for straight people, so they're just kind of in this in between. I do think that as a gay man, especially, I don't know if lesbians, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they have the same experience. But a lot of times, gay men, as they open the door to becoming coming out of the closet, they might, realize, okay, bisexual would be more like have more acceptance if I was bi. And it's not necessarily all a lie either. They're like rationalizing it to themselves, like, well, I am bi. Like, no, I do see myself romantically with a woman, but sexually with a man. So maybe I am bi. And so you come out with that as bi first, and then as they grow to accept themselves and understand themselves fully, then they're like, no, 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 I think I'm gay or 97% gay or whatever, wherever you land on the scale. And so I do think that has perpetuated like a stigma of like, oh, you come out as bi and then you're going to be gay. So nobody's actually bi. You're either gay, straight.
I mean, I came out as bi when I
Yeah.
came out, and I think it was because it's very confusing when you're trying, especially when you're older and trying to figure out your sexuality,
Yeah.
because I had been with a man for 5
Yeah.
years. I was in a long-term relationship. I'd only dated men for most of my life. I'd always been curious about women, and I had crushes on women that I didn't recognize were crushes on
Mm-hmm.
women. And so when I came out, I was like, well, I have to be bi because I've dated men. So it makes sense. Like, I have to be. And then I started dating women, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh,
Like this
oh,
is what it's
this,
supposed to be like.
yeah, this is what dating is. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not what it felt like with men, but it was still, I questioned my validity as a lesbian because,
Yeah.
and I still do because I'm like, well, I did date men and I was into those men when I dated them, I guess, but it was never the same as when I dated women. I just didn't have the same feelings that I had for women when I dated men. And it's very confusing. And
Yeah.
so
And ultimately, labels don't matter. I think
no,
they are a tool that society and we in society use to understand ourselves and our surroundings and others. But ultimately, like, who cares what you are? Just like be yourself. You know what I mean?
exactly. I think there's just such a pressure in the queer community, surprisingly, to
Mm-hmm.
put a label on
For
yourself.
sure. Mm-hmm.
I actually like saw a TikTok of a girl who posted she'd only dated women her whole life.
Yeah, but I also think it's like good for people to recognize, like, oh, I really, this could be the love of my life. And they don't fit into this box that I always thought they were going to.
I think that also can be said for people who have like checklists
Yeah,
in general of like what they look for in a
right.
partner. I'm looking for a man in finance.
Finance,
Trust
trust
fund.
fund,
Six
six
five.
five, blue eyes.
Like my mom's cousin had this checklist of the ideal
Mm-hmm.
husband. And she waited and she waited and she waited. And finally she found this man after like, I think she was in her like late 30s, maybe. Found the man of her dreams and
She
they got
waited.
married. She waited, they had a couple kids, and now she's miserable. Absolutely hates
So
her
it
life.
just goes to show you, no matter what, you're going to be
Doesn't matter.
miserable at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter. Just live your life and be you.
Exactly. So you're going to be miserable. So marry for money the first time. So
Exactly.
that way, when you get divorced, you can marry for love the second time and you have money from the first marriage. It's crazy to think that 2 years ago, well, 3 years ago, really, we were complete strangers. And then we just happened to be on a random cruise. And here we are. And Will is actually starting his own podcast
I
shortly.
am with one of my bestie girls, Alan. And it's more going to be like about pop culture and like, things that gay people love, like Wicked, for example, which I'm surprised we didn't talk about that at all, but it's for the best because we wouldn't be here forever. Wicked,
Because I knew you.
because I
I
knew
knew
you,
you.
I
I have
haven't
been
changed
changed
for
for good.
good.
Anyway, if you like what you hear, Don't forget to follow us on social media at Tatas and Tea Pod. We are on Instagram and TikTok. We are available to stream / listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. If you have a topic you want us to talk about, or you want to be a guest just like Will, just let us know and we'll have you on. We can do it virtually. And if you live close, you can come to the Tatas and Tea studio. And thank you so much to Will for being a guest.
Of course. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Listen up, fans, we're Tatas and Tea, where we turn our traumas into comedy. But we're here for some fun to retell our life tales, from hilarious dates to epic fails. Want some advice, just ask away, but we'll share our opinions either way. No problems too big, no questions too small. With Tatas and Tea, we'll cover it all.